Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sci-Fi Stories. Recently, YouTube disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us without the budget needed to keep operations running. If you enjoy our story today, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our team can afford their living expenses and continue creating these adventures for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or comments below. Thank you, and enjoy the story. Cold. Absolute, suffocating cold. Carl Bloom spat blood onto a surface that looked exactly like shattered black glass. He was light years from any known star chart, his salvage rig reduced to twisted, burning slag behind him. The silence of the dead world pressed against his helmet, thick and heavy. He was entirely alone. But as he looked up at the jagged horizon, he realized a terrifying truth. The planet was not empty. Carl was a mechanic, a blue-collar scavenger who spent his life tearing apart humanity's orbital garbage. He knew machines. He knew how things broke. And he knew that the catastrophic atmospheric entry he had just survived was a mathematical impossibility. Yet, here he was, breathing. He checked his wrist display. The glass was cracked, but the glowing red text remained perfectly legible. Oxygen reserves stood at exactly 3 days. That was it. 3 days of shallow breathing before his lungs would burn and shut down. He pushed himself off the ground. The surface beneath his boots was unnerving. It was not rock. It was not dirt. It was a continuous sheet of fractured, translucent material, slick and freezing to the touch. It reflected the distant, dying star above, like a distorted mirror. "Focus! Carl!" he whispered into the empty comms channel. "Find a vent. Find heat." His distress beacon was intact, but its primary cell was dead. He needed geothermal energy, a volcano, a magma vent, anything to give the battery a spark. He began to walk. Every step produced a sharp crunching sound that echoed into the endless void. Hours bled into one another. The landscape offered nothing but the same jagged, glassy desolation. Then, a shadow broke the horizon. Carl stopped. His breath hitched in his throat. It was a monolith, a towering spire of perfectly smooth, matte black metal that pierced the gray sky. It absorbed all light, casting no reflection on the icy ground. Carl approached it slowly. His mechanic's instincts flared. This was not a crashed vessel. There were no impact craters, no scattered debris, no signs of trauma. The structure grew straight out of the ground. It looked planted, rooted deeply into the very core of the planet. He walked the perimeter, sliding his gloved hand over the cold metal. There were no seams, no doors, no blast shields. He sat at the base and waited, conserving his air, watching the anomaly. Time passed. His suit's chronometer ticked forward. Exactly 12 hours after he arrived, a deep, resonant hum vibrated through the soles of his boots. High above the base, a single, narrow fissure split open. A massive exhalation of warm, filtered gas rushed out into the dead atmosphere. It was a breathing valve, a planetary lung. Carl did not hesitate. He fired his suit's microthrusters, scaling the side of the black metal, and slipped through the gap just before the heavy plates ground shut. He fell into darkness. His boots hit a solid metallic floor with a heavy thud. Carl activated his shoulder lamps. The beams of light cut through the immense, cavernous void. He expected to see miles of cables. He expected glowing control panels, plasma conduits, or at least the skeletal remains of an alien crew. He found nothing of the sort. The interior was vast and hollow. In the exact center of the chamber hung a sphere of golden, viscous fluid. It floated effortlessly in zero gravity, held together by an invisible containment field. Suspended inside the golden liquid were hundreds of crystalline prisms, slowly shifting and aligning in a silent, mathematical dance. It was beautiful, It was terrifying. Carl stepped closer. He reached out to inspect the containment field. As he did, a sharp pain flared in his palm. A piece of the planet's glass surface had sliced right through his reinforced glove during the crash. A single drop of crimson blood squeezed out from the cut. It fell downward, escaping the gravity of his suit, and drifted directly into the floating golden liquid. The drop of blood hit a spinning crystal prism. The reaction was instantaneous. The silence shattered. A sound like a dying star groaning into life ripped through the chamber. The golden fluid boiled, the prisms violently aligned, locking into a perfect geometric grid. Carl stumbled backward. "What did I just do?" Outside the structure, a seismic shockwave tore across the planet. The endless plains of shattered glass began to hum. Deep beneath the icy surface, dormant circuits ignited. The translucent shards were not dirt or rock. They were the fragmented cells of a solar array spanning the entire globe. Millions of miles of black glass simultaneously lit up with blinding, radiant energy. The dead world was waking up. The golden fluid expanded outward, projecting a massive, three-dimensional lattice of hard light that illuminated the cavernous hall. A voice, lacking vocal cords but vibrating directly against the acoustic sensors of Carl's helmet, spoke in a language of pure mathematics. His suit's translation matrix struggled violently to parse the equations before finally settling into a flat, synthetic English output. Biological template accepted. Iron isotope resonance match. Designation confirmed. I am Loom. Carl stared at the towering holographic schematics rotating above him. The projection was not a map of weapons or warp drives. It was mapping entire star systems, calculating gravity wells, and simulating the molecular rearrangement of atmospheric gases. "You are not a ship," Carl breathed, his mechanic's mind racing to comprehend the sheer scale of the blueprints floating before his eyes. "You are a Genesis engine." The machine did not confirm or deny the human terminology. It simply displayed its primary function in cold, hard data. It possessed the capability to initiate complete geological and atmospheric reconfiguration of entire planetary bodies. It was a machine built to play God. Yet, for all its immense power, Loom had been trapped in an endless hibernation cycle. The projection shifted, displaying a microscopic, spinning model of Carl's own blood cells. The engine's core processor was locked behind an ancient, biometric failsafe, requiring a highly specific molecular biological signature to awaken. It demanded a precise ratio of iron and carbon embedded within a biological DNA structure. It was an astronomical coincidence, a statistical anomaly of cosmic proportions, that human blood possessed the exact isotopic resonance required to turn the ignition key of a dormant god. The holographic display zoomed out, pulling back to show a digital rendering of the planet they were currently standing on. The shattered glass surface, the frozen core, the dead, choking atmosphere. A timeline appeared, counting backward by millions of years. Long before humanity had learned to strike two stones together for warmth, Loom had initiated a terraforming sequence right here. But midway through the planetary core ignition, the engine's primary power grid suffered a catastrophic failure. The terraforming process halted abruptly. The planet froze mid-transition, flash cooling into a grotesque, sterile sphere of highly conductive glass. This world was not a natural phenomenon. It was Loom's first aborted canvas, a cosmic mistake, abandoned in the dark. The profound, philosophical weight of this discovery faded quickly, replaced by the grim, mechanical reality of survival. Carl had less than 3 days of oxygen left in his tank. This miraculous machine was awake, but it was practically crippled, stuck in a low-power boot loop with its main optical relays fused by eons of absolute inactivity. He needed the engine's telecommunication array to call for extraction. To do that, he needed to force power from the golden core into the upper transmission spires. Carl unclipped his heavy utility belt. He pulled out a localized plasma torch, heavy hydraulic clamps, and a thick spool of conductive copper alloy wire. It was the equivalent of performing brain surgery with a sledgehammer. He crawled into the subterranean maintenance shafts beneath the central chamber. The architecture down here was dizzying, built with non-Euclidean fractal geometry that made his eyes ache. But the fundamental laws of energy flow remained a universal language. Carl found the severed optical trunks. Instead of attempting to delicately repair the microscopic crystalline pathways, he relied on the blunt force of human engineering. He violently bypassed the elegant alien circuitry. He jammed his crude metal clamps directly into the primary power nodes, bridging the massive gap with his own heavy-duty cabling. He sparked a manual override, forcing raw voltage through the copper wire. The integration was brutal, primitive, and entirely contradictory to the machine's flawless design. Yet it worked with terrifying efficiency. The structural lights in the upper tiers flared to blinding life. The primary communications console hummed with fresh power. Carl routed the newly established energy to the quantum array. He encrypted a pinpoint transmission, actively bypassing all standard galactic emergency frequencies. He aimed the signal at an old, untraceable shadow network, reaching out to the only people in the universe he truly trusted: his former private extraction team, Jax, Sarah, Elias, and Marcus, a crew of hardened professionals who asked no questions and never failed a mission. He compressed the coordinates of the glass planet and hit send. A concentrated pulse of quantum energy shot out from the spire, piercing the dead gray sky. However, Carl did not understand the full, complex architecture of the dead world he was standing on. As the quantum signal violently breached the upper atmosphere, it overloaded the dormant stealth matrix that had kept the glass planet hidden from the rest of the galaxy for millions of years. A massive, invisible membrane surrounding the entire solar sector shattered like brittle ice. The planetary camouflage dissolved into the vacuum of space. Deep in the cold, lightless expanse of the galactic rim, a very different kind of machinery registered the sudden anomaly. It was a listening post belonging to the Sovereign. They were a parasitic, ruthless alien empire, an ancient armada that sustained their unnatural, immortal existence by forcibly draining the life force and thermal energy of entire living worlds. They had scoured the galaxy for millennia, leaving nothing but frozen husks in their wake. And now, their vast sensory networks lit up, locking their predatory gaze on the sudden, glaring burst of primordial energy radiating from a sector they thought had died a very long time ago. A heavy, salvage dropship punched through the upper atmosphere, its retrothrusters screaming a violent protest as it touched down on the slick, black glass surface. The cargo ramp slammed open, venting a cloud of warm condensation, and 4 heavily armored figures stepped out into the freezing void. Jax, the team's propulsion dynamics expert, let out a low, appreciative whistle over the secure comms channel. Sarah, their leading astrogeologist, literally dropped her spectral scanner, watching it shatter into a dozen pieces on the frozen ground without a single word. Elias, a heavily scarred veteran and the crew's dedicated weapons engineer, kept his assault rifle raised but slowly lowered the barrel as he tilted his head all the way back, trying to take in the sheer vertical scale of the monolithic structure before them. Marcus, the pragmatic combat medic, just shook his head slowly. "Carl," Marcus grumbled over the radio, "when you sent an encrypted burst saying you found a shiny rock, I assumed you meant a highly profitable rare earth asteroid. I did not assume you meant the architectural equivalent of a mechanical deity." Inside the cavernous central chamber, the reunion was brief and strictly professional. Oxygen was still a ticking clock, though Marcus wasted no time hooking Carl up to a heavy-duty portable rebreather. With their leader breathing easily again, the team immediately got to work. The repair process that followed was a frantic, chaotic ballet of pure human improvisation. Jax and Elias practically butchered the elegant quantum manifolds, using industrial thermal adhesive and heavy scrap iron plates to bridge microscopic gaps in the logic circuits. Sarah bypassed a hyper-complex fractal cooling system by essentially creating a manual fluid pump out of empty oxygen tanks and flexible polymer tubing. The visual contrast was absurd. They were applying the lowest tier of salvage yard engineering to a machine of unfathomable sophistication. Yet, the irony was palpable. The original creators of this entity had designed its operating system with such incredibly convoluted, recursive logic that it had paralyzed itself millions of years ago trying to perfectly solve minor system faults. By applying crude, brute force Earth mechanics, the human team inadvertently bypassed the hyper-advanced, overthinking diagnostic loops. The massive machine simply accepted the low-tech bandages, overriding its own strict safety protocols, and roared to vibrant life. The golden core spun faster and faster, radiating a warm, comforting hum throughout the hollow chamber. "Databanks are fully coming online," Jax shouted triumphantly from a makeshift terminal, wiping grease from his visor. "I am translating the deep historical archives now." The celebration died in their throats as the golden holographic lattice shifted abruptly, bleeding from a warm, inviting yellow into a sickly, necrotic green. The temperature in the room felt as if it dropped several degrees. The light-hearted camaraderie evaporated instantly as a sprawling galactic map materialized above them. Loom projected the grim, uncensored reality of the universe outside their tiny bubble. It was a history lesson of pure annihilation. The Sovereign. They were not just conquerors or territorial warlords. The three-dimensional projection displayed thousands of vibrant, lush star systems, slowly being encased in dark, suffocating orbital webs. The machine's synthetic, emotionless voice echoed directly into their helmets. "The sovereign entity has consumed exactly 90% of all habitable mass in the known galaxy. They do not eradicate life. They harvest it. Target planets are converted into perpetual thermal batteries. Their biospheres and sentient populations are trapped in an endless, conscious state of agonizing decay, continuously siphoned to fuel the sovereign's biological immortality." Sarah stared at the decaying green projections, her face turning pale behind her reinforced visor. "Carl," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she checked her wrist monitor. "The upper telemetry array is picking up a massive spatial distortion. Someone heard your quantum distress pulse, and judging by the energy signature, it is definitely not a corporate rescue party." A new set of aggressive, jagged coordinates flashed in bright red across the holographic grid. A sovereign scout fleet was actively folding space, riding the exact wake of Carl's signal right back to its source. The estimated time of arrival updated with brutal, uncompromising finality. They would breach the local star system in exactly 48 hours. Elias immediately sprang into action. He slammed his heavy gloves against the primary interface terminal, his eyes scanning the endless cascading streams of alien data for anything remotely resembling a tactical suite. "All right, big guy," Elias muttered, his fingers flying across the makeshift control board with desperate speed. "Show me the heavy guns. Where are the orbital defense cannons, plasma lances, torpedo tubes? Give me point defense. Give me anything." The golden lattice shifted again, displaying a highly detailed, comprehensive schematic of the external hull and internal subsystems. Elias stopped completely still. He stared at the readout, the color draining rapidly from his scarred face. "Carl," Elias said, his voice dropping to a hollow whisper. "There are no guns. There is no targeting matrix. There are no missile bays. This entire fortress has absolutely zero offensive capabilities." "It is a builder." "Elias," Carl replied heavily, staring at the raw, undeniable data floating in the air. "It has localized gravity field emitters, tectonic displacement drives, and subatomic fluid pumps. It was designed to create oceans and raise mountains, not to fight an interstellar war. "Well, it better learn how to fight really fast," Jax yelled from the lower maintenance deck, his voice echoing up the central shaft with a sharp edge of panic. "Because we have a massive, fatal problem down here." Jax pulled up the main engine diagnostic and mirrored it to the central display. The core was alive and generating immense power. Yes, but it was still physically, structurally rooted deep within the planetary mantle. "The main thrusters are buried under 10 miles of solid, supercooled crust," Jax explained, pointing at the red indicators. "To achieve complete physical separation and initiate planetary liftoff, the automated extraction sequence requires exactly 72 hours. The silence that fell over the chamber was heavier than the gravity of a collapsed star. 48 hours, until an armada of immortal, world-eating parasites arrived to drain their souls and turn them into eternal batteries. 72 hours, until their ship could actually run away." The math was absolute, and it offered zero mercy. They were trapped inside a miraculous, godlike machine that possessed the power to rewrite the stars. But they had absolutely no way to defend it. They would have to face a terrifying, God-killing empire using nothing but glorified construction equipment. Exactly 48 hours after the quantum pulse pierced the void, the dead, gray sky above the glass planet physically tore open. It was not a graceful or silent hyperspace exit. The very fabric of local reality ruptured with a sickening, audible crack that vibrated through the crust of the dead world. Violent streaks of highly radioactive purple energy bled through the spatial tear as a sovereign scout fleet ripped its way into real space. They were massive, geometric monstrosities, resembling jagged shards of frozen obsidian rather than traditional starships. Dozens of heavily armored cruisers and one colossal, city-sized dreadnought blotted out the light of the dying star completely, casting an absolute, suffocating shadow over the entire region. Before Carl or his crew could even process the sheer scale of the armada hovering ominously in the upper atmosphere, the dreadnought retaliated against their presence. Massive ventral bays opened along the belly of the flagship. However, instead of firing traditional plasma torpedoes or kinetic bombardments, they launched specialized containment weaponry. Brilliant columns of searing green energy rained down from the sky, striking the planetary glass surface with pinpoint accuracy. These were not explosive munitions. They were gravimetric anchor drills. The searing beams pierced deep into the frozen crust, forming a glowing, impenetrable cage of hard light tethers that locked directly onto Loom's external hull. The tethers pulsed with a sickening hum, aggressively pinning the nascent Genesis engine entirely to the ground. They were completely trapped, anchored to a dead rock with no thrust to escape. Inside the central chamber, the primary communication matrix hijacked itself, overriding Jax's crude encryption walls in a fraction of a second. The golden holographic lattice violently shifted into the sickly green hue of the Sovereign Empire. A towering, three-dimensional projection of a sovereign lord materialized before the human crew. The alien commander was a terrifying amalgamation of necrotic biological tissue and hyper-advanced cybernetics. Its physical form was sustained only by the stolen thermal energy radiating from its thick, black armor, giving off an aura of perpetual decay. It looked down at the human crew with palpable, crushing disgust. "Fascinating," the Sovereign Lord hissed, its synthetic voice vibrating with metallic arrogance that rattled the teeth inside Carl's skull. "We tracked the quantum echo of a Genesis artifact, expecting to find the ancient architects desperately clinging to the edge of the abyss. Instead, we find lower primate scavengers. You crawl through the dirt of a dead cosmos, yet you manage to stumble into the cockpit of a god. How profoundly tragic." You do not even possess the cognitive capacity to comprehend the magnificent engine you are standing inside. Enjoy your final moments of agonizing clarity, little humans. We will peel this artifact from your ashes and use it to drain your pathetic sector dry. The transmission cut perfectly clean. Outside, the dreadnought began charging its primary ventral cannon, gathering a massive sphere of annihilating plasma aimed directly at the central spire of Loom. Elias gripped his useless assault rifle, his knuckles turning pure white beneath his gloves. "Carl!" he yelled, his voice tight with adrenaline and genuine fear. "That main cannon fires in less than 2 minutes. The structural integrity of this spire is strong, but it cannot take a direct hit from a ship that size. If you have a miracle in your back pocket, now is the exact time to play it." Carl did not look up at the menacing projection of the enemy fleet. He was staring intensely at the tectonic displacement schematics hovering over the main console. A crazy, desperate realization began to form in his mechanic's brain. He locked eyes with Sarah. She was a master space geologist. She understood planetary mass and gravitational dynamics better than anyone alive. "Sarah," Carl said, his voice terrifyingly calm amidst the blaring klaxons. "Loom was designed to build worlds. It alters localized physics to compress gas giants and solidify molten cores. What happens if we bypass the internal safety limiters and tell it to terraform the empty space directly above the surface?" Sarah stared at him, her eyes wide, as her mind rapidly processed the insane physics of his proposal. "It would cause a localized density inversion," she breathed, her hands flying across her makeshift manual fluid pump interface to check the theoretical parameters. "Carl, you are talking about treating the literal vacuum of space like a physical element to be crushed. You want to weaponize gravity." "Exactly," Carl snapped, stepping up to the primary command node. "Elias, stop looking for a gun. We are not going to shoot them. We are going to change the fundamental laws of physics around them. Sarah, synchronize the primary gravimetric emitters with JAXA's targeting grid. Aim the tectonic drivers straight up at the specific atmospheric layer where the fleet is hovering. Do not target the ships. The machine does not understand how to shoot at ships. Target the empty space they are occupying." They bypassed the final logic gates, ignoring a dozen critical warning prompts from the ancient operating system. With 20 seconds left until the dreadnought fired, Carl slammed his hand down on the manual ignition relay. Loom did not fire a laser. It did not launch a missile. Instead, the Genesis engine released a silent, invisible wave of pure, unfiltered tectonic manipulation upward. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophically violent. The engine inverted the material density of the entire atmospheric column directly above the glass planet. The dead, incredibly thin atmosphere violently supercompressed. In the blink of an eye, the vacuum of space surrounding the hovering Sovereign Armada was forcefully transformed into a block of hyperdense, localized fluid. The artificial gravity within that specific grid spiked to exactly 10,000 times the gravitational pull of Earth. The asymmetrical warfare was absolute. The Sovereign warships possessed the most advanced energy shields in the known universe, perfectly designed to deflect localized thermal blasts, nuclear warheads, and kinetic projectiles. But those shields were completely useless against a fundamental, inescapable alteration of environmental physics. Without a single bullet or laser being fired by the human crew, the Titanic Obsidian cruisers began to scream. Under the crushing, unfathomable weight of 10,000 Gs, their indestructible outer hulls folded inward like wet paper. The crushing pressure was so sudden and absolute that the ships did not even have the luxury to explode. Their internal kinetic energy and plasma reactors were instantly snuffed out by the impossible density of the space wrapping around them. Massive titanium bulkheads crumpled, atomizing the alien crews instantly. The colossal dreadnought, the pride of the scout fleet, twisted into a grotesque, compressed cube of unrecognizable slag metal in a fraction of a second. The glowing green anchor drills snapped violently, dissipating into harmless sparks as their source was eradicated. The sky was instantly clear. The entire scout fleet had been physically crushed out of existence by the sheer, unyielding weight of gravity itself. A stunned, suffocating silence fell over the central chamber of Loom. Elias slowly lowered his rifle, staring in absolute, terrifying disbelief at the tactical radar. The display now showed nothing but microscopic debris falling like rain onto the shattered glass surface outside. "Did we just win?" Jax whispered, his voice trembling, almost afraid to break the profound silence. "No," Carl replied, his voice heavy with a new, paralyzing dread, as a secondary alarm began to flash violently across the primary console. Right before the dreadnought was crushed into a cubic singularity, its automated telemetry systems had managed to fire off a hyper-compressed quantum distress burst back through the ruptured fabric of space. The news of the scout fleet's impossible, instantaneous destruction reached the deep command nodes of the Sovereign Empire in seconds. The ancient empire analyzed the impossible data. They quickly realized that this was not a tactical fluke or a hidden ambush. A species of lower primates had just successfully weaponized the very fabric of reality using the fabled artifact. Humanity now held the power of absolute creation and destruction on a galactic scale, making them the ultimate threat to the Sovereign's immortal reign. The Sovereign response was immediate, calculated, and entirely merciless. The galactic holographic map flared crimson red as tens of thousands of new warp signatures flooded the outer rim. They were not plotting a course for the glass planet to fight Loom directly. The Sovereign Command declared an absolute sanction. To neutralize a reality-altering threat, they needed the ultimate leverage. The map zoomed out and locked onto a small, insignificant blue planet, located in a distant, quiet spiral arm of the Milky Way. The Sovereign Empire was aggressively redirecting their entire annihilation fleet, an unstoppable armada consisting of millions of warships, straight toward the solar system. They were not coming to fight Carl. They were going to hold the entire human race hostage. The grinding vibration of planetary separation finally ceased. After 72 agonizing hours of automated extraction, the immense black spire tore itself free from the frozen mantle of the glass planet. The Genesis engine did not rely on primitive chemical thrusters or combustible fuel. It manipulated localized gravity itself, sliding out of the planet's gravity, well like a phantom slipping through a solid wall. Carl engaged the hyperspace array. Loom folded the fabric of reality around its hull, plunging into the vibrant, chaotic quantum slipstream in a desperate race against the Sovereign Annihilation Fleet heading straight for the solar system. Inside the central chamber, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Carl stood before the primary communication matrix, projecting a highly secure, encrypted hologram across the stars directly into the high chambers of the Galactic Council. He presented the terrifying tactical data, showing the massive Sovereign fleet converging on a young, unprepared Earth. He begged for a united front, pleading for an alliance of the free worlds to ambush the Sovereign forces at the edge of human space. The response was a chilling display of cosmic cowardice. The Council representative, a towering being of shimmering light and bureaucratic apathy, looked down at Carl with cold, calculated pity. Humanity has inadvertently provoked the apex predators of our universe, the alien diplomat stated flatly, its voice devoid of any moral compass. To intervene would invite the Sovereign's endless wrath upon our own prosperous worlds. Your planet is a necessary, mathematical sacrifice to satiate their hunger and buy the rest of the galaxy time. The Council hereby severs all diplomatic ties with Earth. May your end be swift. The transmission went permanently dark. Humanity was completely and utterly abandoned. The weight of billions of innocent lives pressing down on his shoulders drove Carl to the very edge of madness. He refused to accept extinction as an inevitable mathematical outcome, leaving his crew to monitor the navigation systems. Carl descended deep into the unmapped, labyrinthine maintenance shafts of the machine. He scoured the ancient blueprints until he found what he was looking for in a sealed, forgotten diagnostic vault. It was a spinal communication pod, a direct neurokinetic interface designed for the original architects to commune with the machine's absolute core. Carl stripped off his heavy environmental suit, shivering in the freezing air, and submerged himself into the thick, bioconductive gel filling the pod. He took a deep breath and forcefully aligned the invasive neural needles with the base of his spine. The physical pain was absolute. A blinding flash of white agony shot through his nervous system, instantly dissolving his physical senses into a sprawling, infinite ocean of raw, unfiltered data. Carl drifted as a disembodied consciousness through the deepest, most heavily encrypted layers of Loom's memory core. He bypassed the atmospheric terraforming blueprints and the geological histories of a million worlds, diving relentlessly into the foundational source code of the machine itself. He expected to find the digital ghosts of an ancient, hyper-advanced alien civilization, beings of light or pure energy who had mastered the cosmos long before Earth cooled. Instead, the swirling data stream coalesced into a highly defined, three-dimensional recording of a crumbling, war-torn laboratory. The figures moving frantically around the glowing, holographic schematics were not towering alien overlords. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, and exhausted, desperate eyes filled with a uniquely familiar defiance. They were human. Carl watched in absolute, paradigm-shattering awe as the true history of the universe unfolded before his mind. This was not a recording from the distant past. It was a message from a dying future. Exactly 10,000 years from now, the Sovereign Empire had won the Great Cosmic War. They had consumed the entire galaxy, leaving humanity, as the last surviving species, pushed to the absolute brink of total annihilation at the edge of the dying universe. In their final, agonizing breath, the collective genius of future humanity did not build a weapon to fight a war they had already lost. They built a Genesis engine intertwined with a localized temporal displacement drive. They constructed Loom, the strange, non-Euclidean architecture, the bizarre alien aesthetics, the incomprehensibly complex logic circuits. It was all a deliberate, masterful camouflage. Future humanity had disguised their ultimate creation to look like an ancient, forgotten alien artifact, so that the Sovereign would ignore it if they stumbled upon it first. They had thrown Loom backward through the chaotic abyss of time, abandoning it on a dead planet in the prehistoric era, praying that someone from their own younger, primitive era would eventually find it. The machine was deliberately programmed to respond exclusively to the precise iron isotope resonance of prehistoric human blood. The biometric lock was not a cosmic coincidence. It was a genetic inheritance. The machine had been waiting for Carl, waiting for humanity to find its own salvation. The vision faded, and Carl gasped violently for air, tearing himself from the bioconductive gel. He collapsed onto the cold metal floor of the vault, his body shaking violently, his mind struggling to contain the sheer magnitude of the philosophical revelation. When he finally dragged himself back up to the central command chamber, his crew looked at him with desperate, searching eyes. Carl did not speak a single word about the Council's betrayal. He looked at Jax, Sarah, Elias, and Marcus, his voice echoing with a profound, terrifying authority that shook the very air around them. "They did not build this to save us," Carl said, his eyes burning with the crushing weight of eternity. "We built this. Loom is our own legacy. If Earth falls today, our timeline collapses entirely, and the future where this machine is forged will never exist. We are not just defending our home. We are defending the existence of time itself." The fabric of space tore open above the pale blue dot of Earth. Loom materialized from the quantum slipstream, violently shedding residual hyperspace energy. What Carl and his crew saw through the primary viewport was a nightmare painted on a cosmic scale. Tens of thousands of sovereign superships formed a suffocating, metallic ring around the entire solar system. Their ventral bays were already open, charging the apocalyptic containment beams designed to siphon the molten core of the planet. Light years away, secure in their glittering towers, the Galactic Council watched the live telemetry feeds in absolute silence. They were comfortably waiting for the human race to be mathematically erased from existence within minutes. "They are initiating the drain sequence," Sarah yelled, her hands flying over the manual fluid pumps. "We are too late. Even if we use the localized density inversion, the sheer mass of that armada will rip the gravitational balance of our entire solar system apart. Earth will be pulled into the sun." "Then we do not shoot them," Carl commanded, his voice echoing with the ancient authority of the machine's true architects. "We need more power. We need to push the core past its absolute limit." Marcus did not hesitate. He ripped the primary bioconductive cables from the central console and literally wired them into the environmental suits of the crew. "Brace yourselves," the combat medic shouted. "It is going to pull directly from our central nervous systems." Jax, Sarah, Elias, and Carl screamed in unison as raw, searing voltage surged through their veins. They fed their own biological life force directly into the Genesis engine, forcing the golden core to spin into a blinding, white-hot singularity. The system output spiked to exactly 200% capacity. "Carl, what is the target?" Elias roared over the deafening hum of the overcharged engine. Carl locked his bloodshot eyes onto the deep space telemetry map. He did not aim at the ships threatening their home. Instead, he aligned the Genesis emitter with the enemy's own spatial jump network. He targeted the origin point of the Sovereign Empire, a cluster of barren, hyper-polluted rocks located tens of thousands of light-years away. "We give them back their souls," Carl whispered. He slammed the firing relay. Loom did not fire a weapon of destruction. It unleashed a living quantum pulse. A massive, blinding shockwave of pure, concentrated Genesis energy erupted from the central spire. It bypassed the armada entirely, instantly traversing the hyperspace network and striking the sovereign homeworlds with the force of 1,000 supernovas. The effect was not death. It was a terrifying, explosive rebirth. On the dead worlds of the Sovereign, skies that had been choked with toxic ash for millennia suddenly cracked open, pouring down torrential, purifying rain. Frozen, irradiated wastelands aggressively bloomed into continents of hyperdense, vibrant greenery in a matter of seconds. Dry, cracked ocean basins violently filled with deep, roaring blue water. The Genesis engine rewrote the molecular structure of the planets, aggressively terraforming them back into the paradises they had been millions of years ago. In the orbit of Earth, the Sovereign Armada suddenly froze. The apocalyptic charging sequence of their weapons halted. Every single display screen, every tactical visor, and every neural link within the enemy fleet was forcibly overridden by the quantum feedback loop. The immortal, necrotic soldiers of the Sovereign Empire stared at the live feeds of their ancient homeworlds. They saw rain, they saw oceans, they saw life. The Sovereign had only become parasites because their worlds had died. They had waged an endless, brutal war of survival solely to escape the suffocating cold of extinction. Now, the absolute reason for their eternal cruelty had been instantly erased. A profound, shattering silence fell over the solar system. Then, the greatest military force in the known universe did something the Galactic Council had calculated as a mathematical impossibility. The Sovereign flagship powered down its shields. The massive dreadnoughts rotated their weapons away from Earth. Through the primary communications channel, the terrifying Sovereign Lord who had previously threatened Carl appeared once more. But this time, the towering alien was not standing. It had dropped to its knees. Dark, heavy tears fell from its cybernetic eyes. "You have restored the cradle." The sovereign lord wept, its voice stripped of all metallic arrogance, leaving only the trembling gratitude of a saved child. "The endless hunger is over. We yield to the makers of life." The entire armada surrendered, bowing their ships to the monolithic spire of Loom. Instantly, the diplomatic channels from the Galactic Council exploded with frantic activity. The beings of light who had abandoned humanity mere hours ago were now sending desperate signals of absolute surrender and peace, frantically offering Earth the seat of supreme leadership over the entire known galaxy. They were terrified of the species that could weaponize creation itself. Carl Bloom reached out and severed the Council's transmission with a single, exhausted flick of his wrist. He did not care about their politics. He pulled the bioconductive needles from his spine and collapsed into his command chair. His body ached, his lungs burned, but his mind was completely at peace. He looked out the massive viewport, watching the beautiful, fragile blue marble of Earth spinning quietly against the endless dark. He looked at Jax, Sarah, Elias, and Marcus. They were mechanics, soldiers, and scientists. But as Carl watched the stars burn bright and clear, he realized they were so much more. Humanity were no longer desperate scavengers clinging to the wreckage of a hostile universe. They were the architects of tomorrow. They were the weavers of the cosmos. Thank you all so much for listening to this story today. Where are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's adventure, please help us keep the channel alive. YouTube has disabled our monetization, and we rely entirely on your support to pay our staff so they can feed their families and continue creating these amazing stories for you. A donation of just $1 makes a massive difference. You can support us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link in the video description or pinned comment. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next universe.